I am Kendra, 33 years old, and a major in military intelligence. My husband Jamal texted me right as my shift ended. Do not be late tonight. Mom has a surprise waiting for you. I drove my Jeep Wrangler off the base and picked up our 1-year-old daughter Zuri from daycare, smiling the entire way back to our upscale Atlanta neighborhood. But the moment I walked through the front door, the living room was packed with his relatives. The room was dead silent. Jamal slammed a piece of paper onto our glass coffee table and declared, "She is not my child." His mother Loretta pointed a manicured finger at the door and told me to get out of her house. Before I could even say a word, red and blue lights flashed through the living room windows. Before I share how I systematically dismantled their entire scheme, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you know that true strength is not about avoiding an ambush, but having the tactical precision to destroy your enemies before they see it coming. The tires of my Jeep Wrangler crunched against the pristine gravel of our circular driveway in Buckhead. I killed the engine and took a deep breath, letting the exhaustion of a 14-hour shift at the base wash over me. I was still wearing my OCP fatigues, my combat boots heavy against the pavement as I walked around to the passenger side. Zuri was awake in her car seat, clutching a small plush elephant and kicking her legs. I unbuckled her, lifting her into my arms and kissing her forehead. Jamal had promised a welcome home dinner. He said his mother Loretta was cooking her famous short ribs. My stomach growled at the thought. I balanced Zuri on my hip, grabbed my tactical backpack, and unlocked the heavy mahogany front door. The house was cool and quiet. Too quiet. There was no smell of roasted meat or spices. There was no music playing from the kitchen speakers. I stepped into the foyer and dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl on the console table. I walked into the sunken living room and stopped dead in my tracks. The room was packed. Jamal stood perfectly rigid in the center of the room, positioned in front of our modern glass coffee table. Behind him sat his mother Loretta, her arms crossed tight over her chest, her face a mask of absolute disdain. To her left sat Jamal's older brother Malik and his white wife Brooke, who refused to make eye contact with me. Several other aunts and cousins occupied the remaining armchairs and the edges of the sectional sofa. Nobody was smiling. Nobody offered a greeting. The silence in the room was heavy and aggressive. I held Zuri tighter against my chest, feeling my military training instantly override my confusion. You assess the threat before you react. I scanned the room, noting the aggressive postures, the blocked exits, and the complete lack of food or celebration. Jamal stepped forward. He did not look at Zuri. He reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and slammed it down flat onto the glass coffee table. The sharp crack echoed through the high ceilings. "She is not my child," Jamal said. His voice was loud, rehearsed, and completely devoid of emotion. Loretta immediately stood up. She marched to the edge of the rug, pointing her manicured index finger directly at my face. "Get your cheating self out of my house," Loretta demanded. "You are a disgrace to this family. Pack your things and leave." I did not flinch. I did not drop a single tear. Panic is a luxury you cannot afford in an ambush. I slowly lowered my backpack to the hardwood floor. I kept my left arm securely around Zuri, who was now looking around the room with wide, curious eyes. With my right hand, I reached down and picked up the paper Jamal had slammed onto the table. I read the document. It was printed on standard bright white printer paper. The header featured a generic blue medical logo with the words Regional DNA Testing Center. There was no specific doctor listed. There was no laboratory accreditation number. The formatting was misaligned, and the results section simply read, "Probability of paternity 0% in a bold red font." It looked like something printed at a local copy shop. I looked up from the paper and locked eyes with Jamal. He shifted his weight nervously under my stare. He expected me to cry, to beg, to ask for an explanation. He expected the emotional breakdown of a cornered wife. I gave him absolutely nothing. "You printed this," I said, my voice dangerously calm and level. "Do not you dare lie to my son," Loretta shouted, taking another step forward. "The proof is right there." We know what you do on those deployments. We know you have been dragging our family name through the mud. You are unfit to be a mother, and you are unfit to be a wife." Brooke leaned forward on the sofa, placing a hand on Malik's knee. She finally looked at me, wearing an expression of practiced pity. "Just tell the truth," Kendra Brooke said softly. "It will be easier for everyone if you just admit it." I ignored Brooke completely. I kept my eyes fixed on Jamal. He was sweating slightly at the temples. His hands were balled into fists at his sides. He had orchestrated this entire gathering to publicly humiliate me, to force me into a reactive state. In intelligence, you learn that the loudest person in the room is usually the one hiding the biggest vulnerability. Jamal needed an audience. He needed his mother to fight his battle. I folded the generic paper neatly in half and slid it into the cargo pocket of my fatigues. Zuri babbled softly, playing with the collar of my uniform. "You have lost your mind, Jamal," I said. I turned away from him and looked at Loretta. "And this is my house, Loretta. My name is on the deed. You can find the door yourself." Loretta gasped, clutching the pearl necklace at her throat. "How dare you speak to me that way in front of this family?" Jamal pulled a sleek smartphone from his pocket. "You do not get to give orders anymore, Kendra. I am taking full custody of my daughter. You are not taking her anywhere." "Your daughter?" I asked, raising one eyebrow. 2 minutes ago you slammed a fake document on this table claiming she was not yours. Which narrative are you going with, Jamal?" Before Jamal could formulate a response, a harsh, sweeping light cut across the living room walls. The heavy linen curtains were open, illuminating the space with alternating flashes of bright red and blinding blue. The flashing lights bounced off the glass coffee table and illuminated the shocked faces of the relatives sitting on the sofa. The low rumble of a heavy engine idled directly at the end of my driveway. The distinct chirp of a police siren sounded twice, cutting through the quiet suburban evening. I looked out the front window. 2 military police cruisers and a local law enforcement vehicle had parked at steep angles, blocking my Jeep Wrangler. Heavy doors slammed shut. Uniformed officers were walking rapidly up the front walkway, accompanied by a woman in a sharp business suit carrying a thick clipboard. Jamal had not just invited his family for a public shaming. He had called the authorities to my doorstep. He stood there watching the police approach with a look of absolute triumph on his face. I tightened my grip on Zuri. My heart rate remained steady. I rolled my shoulders back, standing at strict attention in the middle of my own living room. The ambush was set, the trap was sprung, and the real war was just beginning. Jamal marched to the front door and pulled it open before the authorities could even knock. 2 military police officers stepped into the foyer. Their heavy boots thudded against the hardwood floor. They wore crisp uniforms, utility belts, and stern expressions. Right behind them walked a woman in a sharp gray pantsuit. She wore a badge around her neck that clearly identified her as an investigator for the Division of Family and Children's Services. "Officers, thank God you got here," Jamal said. His voice was breathless. He was playing the role of the distraught, panicked father with theatrical perfection. "My wife just returned from deployment. I have irrefutable proof she committed adultery. She is in direct violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and she is neglecting our daughter. The baby is not safe with her." The woman in the pantsuit stepped past Jamal and walked directly into the sunken living room. The 2 MPs followed, taking up positions near the entryway. They scanned the room, taking in the dozen family members sitting on the sofas and chairs. Then their eyes locked on me. I stood perfectly still in the center of the room. My OCP fatigues were immaculate. Zuri was resting on my hip, completely unfazed by the sudden crowd. "Major Kendra," the woman said, holding up her badge. "I am Agent Caldwell with Child Protective Services. We received a hotline call reporting severe child neglect and abandonment. We were informed you have been leaving your 1-year-old daughter with unvetted strangers for weeks at a time while carrying on an extramarital affair." Before I could formulate a response, Loretta sprang into action. She leaped up from her armchair and rushed across the rug. Her face was twisted into a mask of exaggerated terror. "That baby is in danger!" Loretta cried out, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. She reached her hands out, lunging directly toward Zuri. "Give me my grandchild, you monster! You leave her in filthy conditions. You do not even care about her. Give her to me right now." Loretta closed the distance between us. Her manicured hands reached for Zuri's arms. "Step back from my daughter, Loretta." I did not yell. I did not scream. I projected my voice from my diaphragm using the exact command tone I used to direct battalions in combat zones. The sound cut through the room like a physical blade. The sheer authority in my voice made Loretta freeze instantly. Her hands stopped inches from my child. She stumbled backward, blinking in shock. The two MPs instinctively straightened their posture. They recognized a superior officer taking control of a chaotic environment. I turned my attention back to the woman in the gray suit. I did not offer excuses. I did not defend my character. I operated purely on tactical facts. "Agent Caldwell," I said, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "My husband just handed you a narrative built on absolute fiction. Let us look at the reality." I shifted Zuri slightly, resting her weight on my left hip. With my right hand, I pulled my smartphone from my cargo pocket. I bypassed the lock screen and opened my secure encrypted medical portal. "You received a report of neglect and unvetted caregivers." I continued stepping forward and holding the screen up so Agent Caldwell could see it clearly. "What you are looking at is the Comprehensive Family Care Plan, mandated and approved by the United States Department of Defense. It was filed, updated, and legally notarized before my deployment." Agent Caldwell squinted at the screen, adjusting her glasses. I swiped to the next document. "Here are Zuri's pediatric records from Emory Healthcare. Her last checkup was exactly 4 days ago. You will see her weight and height are in the 90th percentile. Her vaccination schedule is flawless. There are absolutely no signs of malnutrition, bruising, or neglect. The attending physician is Dr. Harrison. You can call his office right now to verify." Jamal stepped up behind the agent. "Do not listen to her. She is lying. She faked those documents. She is a fraud." I ignored him completely. I swiped to a third application on my phone. "Here is the background check, licensing documentation, and daily care logs for my daughter's provider," I stated, tapping the screen to highlight the official state seals. "The provider is bonded, insured, and cleared by the military background check system. I receive a digital log of Zuri's meals, naps, and activities every 4 hours. I have complete surveillance access to the facility. My daughter has never been abandoned for a single second." Agent Caldwell took a step back. She looked at my phone, then looked at Zuri. Zuri was currently chewing happily on the collar of my uniform, looking healthy, clean, and completely content. The agent frowned deeply. She turned her head and glared at Jamal. "Mr. Jamal," Agent Caldwell said, her voice dropping an octave. "Filing a false report with Child Protective Services is a serious offense. This child is clearly in excellent health and this mother has immaculate documentation." Jamal's confident posture began to crack. He pointed a shaking finger at the glass coffee table. "Look at the DNA test. I put it right there. She committed adultery. That violates military law. You have to arrest her." I turned my gaze to the 2 military police officers standing by the door. "Officers," I said, addressing them with crisp authority, "my husband is attempting to allege a violation of Article 134 based on a piece of printer paper he brought into this room 5 minutes ago." I reached into my left chest pocket and pulled out my military identification card. I held it out. "I am Major Kendra, currently assigned to the Regional Military Intelligence Battalion," I said. "The document on that table features no laboratory accreditation, no chain of custody, and no verified physician's signature. It is a fabricated document. If you require verification of my conduct and whereabouts for the duration of my deployment, you do not need to rely on domestic gossip." I tapped the screen of my phone and pulled up a contact card. "This is the direct cellular number for Colonel Thomas at Fort Eisenhower," I instructed. "Call him right now. He will confirm my deployment schedule, my clearance level, and my absolute adherence to the Uniform Code of Military Justice." The older of the 2 MPs stepped forward and looked at the contact information. He then glanced down at the piece of paper sitting on the coffee table. He did not even need to pick it up to see how fake it looked. The bright red 0%, printed in a standard word processing font, was glaringly obvious. The officer shook his head and looked back at Jamal with undisguised contempt. "Sir," the officer said, his tone sharp, "military police do not conduct arrests based on unverified internet printouts in the middle of domestic disputes. You are wasting federal resources." "But she cheated." Jamal stammered, his voice rising in panic as his entire ambush disintegrated before his eyes. "The test proves it. You have to take her in. You have to take the baby." Brooke shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. She leaned over and whispered something to Malik, who was now staring at the floor, completely silent. The rest of the family members exchanged nervous glances. The grand public shaming they had gathered to witness had just been shut down by hard, undeniable data. Agent Caldwell closed her clipboard with a loud snap. "Major Kendra, I apologize for the intrusion. Your documentation is perfectly in order. We will be closing this inquiry immediately." "Thank you, Agent Caldwell," I replied. The MPs nodded to me in a sign of professional respect. "Have a good evening, Major." They turned around and walked out the front door, closely followed by the CPS agent. The heavy front door clicked shut. The flashing red and blue lights outside faded away as the vehicles pulled out of the driveway. The living room fell back into a suffocating dead silence. I stood in the center of the room. Jamal was staring at the front door, his mouth hanging slightly open. Loretta had retreated to her armchair, her face pale and her hands trembling in her lap. They had thrown their best strike. They had brought the authorities to my door expecting me to break. They had failed completely. I did not offer them another word. I turned around and walked down the hallway toward the master bedroom. My combat boots hit the floor in a steady, rhythmic march. I entered the bedroom and set Zuri down in her portable playpen. I opened the closet and pulled out a single black tactical duffel bag. I did not pack memories. I did not pack photo albums or knickknacks. I packed exactly 7 days' worth of civilian clothes, my uniform components, my secure laptop, and my daughter's essential items. The entire process took exactly 3 minutes. I zipped the heavy canvas bag shut, slung it over my shoulder, and picked Zuri back up. I walked back down the hallway and re-entered the living room. Nobody had moved. They were all sitting in the exact same positions, frozen in the aftermath of their failed ambush. Jamal looked up at me as I approached the front door. His eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and rage. "Where are you going?" Jamal demanded, stepping in front of the doorway. "You cannot just leave. We are not done here." I stopped. I looked him dead in the eye. My expression was completely blank. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger. "Move," I said. Jamal hesitated. He looked at my face, and whatever he saw there made him step aside. I walked out the front door and down the driveway. I opened the back door of my Jeep Wrangler and secured Zuri into her car seat, making sure the straps were perfectly tight. I tossed the tactical duffel bag into the passenger seat and climbed behind the steering wheel. I closed the door, sealing out the noise of the neighborhood. I pushed the start button and the engine roared to life. Just as I shifted the car into reverse, my phone screen lit up on the dashboard mount. It was an urgent push notification from my primary banking application. I tapped the alert. The screen refreshed, displaying my joint savings and checking accounts. Joint savings account balance $0. Joint checking account balance $0. Withdrawal of $150,000 complete. I stared at the glowing numbers. Jamal had not just planned a public humiliation. He had executed a synchronized financial strike. The authorities were meant to be a distraction, keeping me occupied while the wire transfers cleared. I backed the Jeep out of the driveway, my face completely unreadable in the glow of the dashboard lights. The ambush had failed, but the financial war had just been declared. I merged onto the interstate, leaving the flashing lights and my shattered marriage in the rearview mirror. My mind compartmentalized the betrayal instantly. Jamal thought draining the joint accounts would leave me stranded and desperate. He forgot who he married. During my first deployment to a combat zone, I learned that a soldier without a contingency plan is a dead soldier. 4 years ago, before Zuri was even born, I opened a private emergency account at a completely different financial institution. The statements went to a secure post office box. Jamal had absolutely no idea it existed. I pulled into the brightly lit parking lot of a secure extended stay hotel on the north side of the city. I chose this location because it required keycard access for the elevators and had comprehensive camera coverage in the parking lot. I paid for a month in advance using my emergency funds. Once inside the room, I set up Zuri in the center of the bed with her favorite soft blanket. She was already drifting off to sleep, completely unaware of the war raging around her. I opened my secure laptop and connected to the encrypted military network using my mobile hotspot. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I accessed the County Family Court public portal. I ran a search on my own name and Jamal's name. The results loaded instantly. Jamal had filed an emergency ex parte motion for full custody of Zuri at 4 o'clock that afternoon. That meant he filed the paperwork hours before I even got off my shift at the base. He had orchestrated the entire living room ambush, knowing the legal strike was already in motion. I opened the attached file and read his sworn affidavit. He cited infidelity and moral turpitude. He claimed my military deployments constituted severe child abandonment and neglect. His goal was not just to take my daughter. He was actively building a narrative to trigger a dishonorable discharge and strip me of my military pension. I spent the next 3 hours pulling my own financial firewalls, locking down my credit, freezing my social security number, and severing Jamal from my military life insurance policy as the primary beneficiary. At exactly 9 o'clock the next morning, a sharp knock sounded at the hotel room door. I instantly tensed. I checked the peephole. Standing in the hallway holding a cardboard tray of expensive coffees were Jamal's older brother Malik and his white wife Brooke. I unlocked the door but kept the heavy security chain engaged. "How did you find me?" I asked, my voice completely flat. Brooke offered a sympathetic smile that looked entirely rehearsed. "Jamal put a tracking device in the lining of Zuri's diaper bag a few weeks ago," she said softly. "Kendra, please let us in. We just want to talk. We want to help you fix this mess before it gets worse." I unlatched the chain and stepped back, letting them walk into the small room. I made a mental note to locate and destroy the tracking device the moment they left. Brooke set the coffees on the small kitchenette counter. She turned to me with wide, pleading eyes, playing the role of the innocent peacemaker. "Kendra, this is all just a terrible misunderstanding," Brooke began. "You know how Jamal gets when his pride is hurt. He is just acting out of pain. If you just agree to sign the temporary custody papers and step away for a little bit to let things cool down, Jamal will back off. I promise you, he will drop the moral turpitude charges with the military. He just wants peace." I stared at her, letting the silence stretch until Malik shifted uncomfortably. "You want me to surrender my child to a man who just ambushed me with a fake DNA test and drained my bank accounts?" I asked. Malik rubbed the back of his neck, looking anywhere but at me. "Kendra, you have to understand the intense pressure Jamal is under right now. The family logistics business is bleeding cash. We are facing massive supply chain failures and creditors are calling every single day." Brooke reached out and tried to touch my arm. I stepped back, avoiding her hand entirely. She sighed heavily, dropping the peacemaker act for a split second. "Jamal just really needs the capital from Zuri's trust account to save the family business," Brooke blurted out. "He is desperate, Kendra. If you fight him on custody, the courts will freeze everything. He needs that money right now, or the entire family goes bankrupt." The room went dead silent. The motive had just been handed to me on a silver platter. My late father was a highly successful real estate developer in Atlanta. When he passed away, he left a $4 million irrevocable trust fund for Zuri. It was designed to cover her education and future investments. Jamal had zero legal access to it while we were married. The only way Jamal could touch that massive amount of capital was if he became the sole custodial parent and proved to a judge that I was entirely unfit to manage my daughter's affairs. He did not care about Zuri, he cared about the $4 million. "Get out," I said. "Kendra, please," Brooke started. I took a step toward them, channeling every ounce of command authority I possessed. I said, "Get out of my room. You have exactly 10 seconds before I physically remove you myself." Malik grabbed Brooke's arm and pulled her toward the door. They practically tripped over each other, rushing into the hallway. I slammed the door shut and engaged the deadbolt. I grabbed the diaper bag, ran my hands along the inner lining until I felt the hard plastic disc of the tracking device. I sliced the fabric open with my pocket knife, pulled the tracker out, crushed it under the heavy heel of my combat boot, and threw the pieces into the trash. I walked over to the desk and picked up my phone. I dialed a direct encrypted line. It rang twice before a sharp voice answered. "Major Kendra," the voice said. "Captain Jackson, I need a favor," I said. Captain Marcus Jackson was my military lawyer, a fiercely intelligent legal officer who owed me his career after I helped him navigate a complex intelligence failure 2 years ago. "Name it," he replied without hesitation. "I need a full shadow audit on my husband Jamal," I instructed. "I need you to pull every financial record, every business dealing, and every offshore account tied to his name or his family's logistics company. And I need you to run a deep background check on a facility calling itself the Regional DNA Testing Center." "Send me whatever you have," Jackson said. "I will put my best analysts on it immediately." I hung up the phone and looked over at Zuri. She was awake now, pulling herself up on the edge of the playpen and smiling at me. I forced myself to smile back. They thought I was just a woman they could push around and manipulate. They forgot that I dismantle hostile organizations for a living. At 2 o'clock in the morning, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. I answered it immediately. Major Jackson said, his voice tight with adrenaline. "You were right to ask for the audit. Jamal did not just drain your joint accounts. His company is completely insolvent. He owes $1.5 million to an offshore private equity firm, and they are threatening to liquidate his personal assets by the end of the month. He is drowning in bad debt, and the DNA clinic I asked. It does not legally exist," Jackson replied. "The address listed on the document he gave you is an abandoned strip mall next to a local liquor store. The business entity was registered 3 weeks ago by an obscure holding company. We traced the holding company's registration back to a maiden name, Loretta. Your mother-in-law created a fake medical clinic just to forge that paternity test." I sat up in the dark hotel room, feeling a cold smile spread across my face. Jamal and Loretta had handed me the exact weapons I needed to destroy them. They wanted a war over custody and wealth. I was going to give them a massacre. I merged onto the northbound lanes of the interstate, leaving the flashing police lights and my completely shattered marriage in the rearview mirror. The glow of the dashboard illuminated the dark interior of the Jeep. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Zuri was fast asleep in her car seat, her chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. She was safe. That was the only variable that mattered right now. My mind compartmentalized the emotional betrayal, instantly locking it away in a dark vault. Jamal thought that by draining our joint checking and savings accounts, he would leave me stranded, panicked, and desperate. He assumed I would be forced to crawl back to that house and beg for access to my own money. He forgot exactly who he married. During my very first deployment to a high-threat combat zone, my commanding officer taught me a lesson I never forgot. A soldier without a contingency plan is already a casualty. You never rely on a single point of failure. 4 years ago, before Zuri was even a thought, before the cracks in my marriage had fully surfaced, I opened a private emergency account at a completely different financial institution. I routed a small percentage of my combat pay and performance bonuses directly into it. The statements went to a secure military post office box. Jamal had absolutely no idea it existed. He thought he had severed my supply lines, but he had only cut the decoy. I bypassed the standard commercial hotels and drove toward the perimeter of the city. I pulled into the brightly lit parking lot of a corporate extended stay suite. I specifically chose this location for its tactical advantages. It required a programmed keycard just to access the main lobby doors. The elevators required a second keycard swipe to move between floors. The perimeter lighting was immaculate, and I spotted 6 high-definition security cameras covering the parking lot and entrance. Nobody was getting near this building without being recorded. I walked up to the front desk with my tactical backpack over my shoulder and Zuri resting against my chest. I paid for a full month in advance using the debit card linked to my unlisted emergency account. The night clerk barely blinked, handing over 2 key cards and pointing me toward the secure elevators. Once inside the suite, I immediately conducted a sweep of the room. I checked the window locks, ensured the heavy blackout curtains were drawn tight, and engaged the deadbolt and the heavy metal security latch on the door. I gently laid Zuri in the center of the plush king-sized bed, building a small fortress of thick pillows around her. I covered her with her favorite soft blanket. She let out a quiet sigh and curled onto her side, completely oblivious to the absolute war raging around her. I walked over to the small glass desk in the corner of the room. It was time to set up the war room. I unzipped my tactical bag and pulled out my military-issued laptop. I did not connect to the hotel public wireless network. That was an amateur mistake that left a digital footprint. Instead, I activated my secure encrypted mobile hotspot, establishing a private tunnel directly to my servers. My fingers flew across the illuminated keyboard. The first step in any counteroffensive is understanding the exact nature of the enemy attack. Jamal had ambushed me with a fake DNA test, but that was just theater. The real strike was always on paper. I accessed the county family court public portal, navigating through the clunky digital interface. I ran a search query using my own name and Jamal's name. The search results populated instantly. My eyes locked onto the top line. Jamal had filed an emergency ex parte motion for full physical and legal custody of Zuri. The timestamp on the filing read 4:00 that afternoon. The reality of his timeline clicked into place with sickening precision. He had filed the custody paperwork hours before I even got off my shift at the military base. He had orchestrated the entire living room ambush, the fake DNA results, and the call to Child Protective Services, knowing the legal strike was already sitting on a judge's desk. The ambush was just a staging ground to create a police report that he could later attach to his custody demands. I clicked on the attached file and read his sworn affidavit. The sheer audacity of his lies leaped off the screen. Under penalty of perjury, he cited severe infidelity and moral turpitude. He claimed my military deployments constituted severe child abandonment and chronic neglect. He painted a picture of a reckless, unstable mother who prioritized illicit affairs over her own infant. I scrolled down to the bottom of the affidavit to examine the legal counsel on record. The attorney name was Richard Vance, a local lawyer known for aggressive, sleazy tactics and high-volume churn. He was not a high-end litigator. He was the kind of lawyer you hired when you needed to file fast and dirty paperwork based on fabricated claims. It told me Jamal was moving too fast to secure top-tier counsel, or he simply did not have the upfront retainer for a legitimate firm. That was a tactical error on his part. As I read the specific legal terminology he used, the true objective became glaringly obvious. His goal was not just to take my daughter. The language was meticulously crafted to trigger a military investigation. Adultery is a direct violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. A conviction, or even a sustained investigation, could lead to a court-martial. Jamal was actively trying to trigger a dishonorable discharge. He wanted to strip me of my rank, destroy my professional reputation, and obliterate my military pension. He wanted me penniless, disgraced, and separated from my child. I did not panic. Panic creates mistakes. Instead, I initiated a total financial and digital lockdown. I spent the next 3 hours pulling up massive firewalls around every aspect of my life. First, I contacted the major credit bureaus. I placed hard security freezes on my social security number and Zuri's social security number. Jamal would not be able to open a single line of credit or take out a fraudulent loan in our names. I did not stop there. I pulled up the transaction history for the joint accounts he had drained. I needed to know exactly where that $150,000 went. The transfer details showed the money had been routed to a corporate account associated with his mother's maiden name. It was wire fraud masquerading as a domestic dispute. I took high-resolution screenshots of every transfer, every timestamp, and every routing number. I compiled the evidence into a secure encrypted folder. If he wanted to play financial games, I was going to ensure there was a permanent, unalterable paper trail documenting his theft. Next, I logged into my military payroll portal. I immediately deleted the joint account Jamal had just drained and rerouted my direct deposits to my secure emergency account. Then I moved to the military life insurance registry. I systematically revoked Jamal's status as my primary beneficiary, replacing him with a secure trust in Zuri's name. I locked him out of my healthcare portals, my retirement funds, and my vehicle registration. I changed every single password using complex alphanumeric generators and instituted two-factor authentication linked exclusively to my secure device. Then I addressed our physical assets. I logged into the county tax assessor website and placed a fraud alert on the deed to our home. Since my name was the primary on the mortgage, I filed an immediate digital notice with my lender regarding a hostile domestic situation, freezing any potential attempts to leverage the equity in the house. Jamal might be living there right now, but he was effectively sitting in a locked vault. He could not sell it, he could not borrow against it, and he could not use it to fund his legal war against me. I sat back in the ergonomic desk chair staring at the glowing laptop screen. The digital perimeter was secure. Jamal had fired the first shot thinking he had caught me sleeping. He thought he had severed my resources and cornered me legally, but he had only exposed his hand. He had shown me exactly how far he was willing to go and what lies he was willing to tell. I looked over at Zuri still sleeping peacefully amidst the pillows. I made a silent vow in the dark room. They wanted to use the legal system to break me. They wanted to weaponize my military service against me. I was going to turn those exact same systems into a tactical strike that would completely level their lives. The financial hit was meant to end me, but it only gave me the clarity I needed to destroy them. The morning sun began to bleed through the edges of the heavy blackout curtains, casting a sharp sliver of light across the hotel room wall. I had been awake for nearly 30 hours, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins kept my mind operating with absolute lethal precision. I closed the final browser tab on my secure laptop, having successfully locked Jamal out of every financial avenue we shared. I reached for my water bottle, taking a slow, measured drink, when 3 sharp knocks echoed through the small room. I did not jump. I set the bottle down silently and moved toward the door with measured steps, making sure my boots made no sound against the carpet. I pressed my eye to the brass peephole. Standing in the brightly lit hallway was Jamal's older brother Malik. Next to him stood his wife, Brooke. She was clutching a cardboard carrier, holding 2 large iced coffees from a premium cafe down the street. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy bun that was carefully styled to look effortless, and her face was arranged into a mask of deep maternal concern. I knew exactly what this was. In military intelligence, we call it a soft breach. When the aggressive frontal assault fails, you send in the negotiators disguised as neutral parties to lower the target's defenses. I reached up and unlatched the deadbolt, but I kept the heavy metal security chain firmly engaged. I pulled the door open just a few inches, stopping when the chain pulled taut. The metal clinked loudly in the quiet hallway. Malik shifted his weight nervously, looking down at his expensive leather loafers. Brooke immediately stepped forward, pushing her face into the narrow gap. Her eyes widened with exaggerated sympathy. "Kendra." "Thank goodness you are safe," Brooke said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We have been so worried about you and little Zuri. Please let us come in. We just want to talk and make sure you are okay." I did not move. I kept my face entirely blank, staring at her through the crack in the door. "How did you get this address?" I asked. Brooke let out a long, dramatic sigh. Jamal was frantic. Kendra. He put a small GPS tracker in the lining of Zuri's diaper bag a few weeks ago, just in case of an emergency. He was only trying to protect his daughter. "Please unlatch the door. We brought you coffee. We know you must be exhausted." I registered the information about the tracker, instantly filing it away to be dealt with the moment they left. I looked at the cardboard tray in her hands, and then looked back at her face. I reached up, sliding the chain out of its groove, and pulled the door open. I stepped back, allowing them to enter my space. The hotel room was small, and their presence immediately made the air feel suffocating. Malik stood awkwardly near the small kitchenette, rubbing the back of his neck and refusing to make direct eye contact with me. Brooke walked right to the center of the room and placed the coffees on the small circular dining table. She turned to me, placing a hand over her heart. "We are not here to fight," Brooke said softly. "We are here as your family. We want to help you fix this absolute mess before it destroys your life." I crossed my arms over my chest. "I am listening," I said. Brooke took a step closer, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper. "You know how Jamal gets when his pride is wounded? He is acting out of pain and fear. But filing those papers with the military and calling the police, that was a mistake. We all know that. We want to stop this from escalating into a massive public scandal that ruins your military career." "And how exactly do you propose we do that?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly level. Brooke smiled, thinking she had found an opening. "Just sign the temporary custody papers, Kendra. That is all it takes. If you just agree to sign the temporary order granting Jamal physical custody of Zuri, he will completely back off. I promise you he will immediately drop the moral turpitude charges. He will retract the infidelity claims with your commanding officer. You can step away, take a breath, and let things cool down without losing your rank or your pension. He just wants peace for the family." I stared at her, letting the absolute silence stretch until the tension in the room became thick enough to cut. I looked over at Malik. His jaw was clenched tight, and a bead of sweat was forming near his temple. He knew exactly what his wife was trying to do. "You want me to surrender my child to a man who ambushed me with a fabricated medical document?" I asked. "You want me to hand my daughter over to a man who drained my bank accounts while I was driving away from my own home?" Malik finally looked up, his eyes desperate. "Kendra, you have to understand the incredible pressure my brother is under right now. The family logistics business is bleeding cash. We are facing massive supply chain failures, and creditors are calling the office every single hour. He is not thinking straight. He is just desperate to keep the family afloat." Brooke shot Malik a warning glare, but he was already looking back down at the floor. Brooke turned her attention back to me, her frustration beginning to crack through her sweet facade. "Look, Kendra, we are trying to save you from a brutal legal war," Brooke said, her voice rising in pitch. "Jamal is not going to stop. He has lawyers ready to tear you apart in family court. He just really needs the capital from Zuri's account to save the family business. If you fight him on custody, the courts will freeze everything for months and the entire family goes bankrupt." The room went dead silent. I did not blink. I did not move a single muscle. The motive had just been handed to me with absolute clarity. Brooke, in her desperate attempt to appeal to my logic, had just exposed the entire foundation of Jamal's strategy. It was never about me. It was never about infidelity. It was certainly never about Jamal wanting to be a devoted father to Zuri. It was about my late father. My father was a highly successful real estate developer who built entire subdivisions across Atlanta. He was a man of immense wealth and even greater foresight. He never liked Jamal. He saw right through the charm and the tailored suits, recognizing a man who wanted shortcuts to success. When my father passed away, he left behind a massive estate including a $4 million irrevocable trust fund exclusively for Zuri. The legal structure of that trust was impenetrable. Jamal had absolutely zero legal access to the principal or the interest while we were married. The funds were locked behind a wall of corporate trustees designed to cover Zuri's education and future investments. There was only one single loophole in the entire document. The only way Jamal could ever touch that $4 million was if he became the sole custodial parent and proved to a judge that I was entirely unfit to manage my daughter's affairs. He needed to strip my parental rights. He needed a dishonorable discharge from the military to prove moral bankruptcy. He needed me destitute and disgraced so he could gain control of the trust and use my daughter's money to pay off the massive debts sinking his failing logistics company. I looked at Brooke. The realization of what she had just confessed was slowly dawning on her face. Her eyes darted back and forth and her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "Get out," I said. My voice was a low, dangerous register that I rarely used outside of a briefing room. "Kendra, please." Brooke started taking a half step backward. "I did not mean it like that. You are taking my words out of context." I uncrossed my arms and took one step toward them. I channeled every ounce of command authority I possessed, projecting my presence to fill every inch of the small hotel room. I said, "Get out of my room," I commanded. "You have exactly 10 seconds to exit through that door before I physically remove you myself, and trust me, Brooke, you do not want to see what that looks like." Malik grabbed Brooke by the elbow, pulling her toward the doorway. He did not say a word. He practically dragged his wife into the hallway, leaving the 2 iced coffees sweating on the table. I slammed the door shut behind them and threw the deadbolt. I walked over to the diaper bag sitting on the luggage rack. I ran my hands along the thick canvas lining, feeling for any hard, unnatural shapes. My fingers brushed against a small, rigid disc sewn into the bottom seam. I pulled my tactical folding knife from my pocket, flipped the blade open, and sliced through the fabric. I pulled out a small black GPS tracking beacon. I placed it on the floor, raised my combat boot, and crushed the device under my heel until the plastic shattered and the internal circuit board snapped in half. I swept the broken pieces into the trash can. I walked back over to my desk and picked up my phone. Jamal and his family thought they were playing a game of intimidation. They thought they could pressure me into surrendering my child to fund their failing business. They wanted to use the legal system as a weapon against me. I stared at the dark screen of my phone, feeling a cold, calculated focus settle over my entire body. I was going to give them exactly the war they were asking for, but I was going to dictate the terms of their surrender. I kept the phone pressed to my ear. The glow from the laptop screen cast sharp shadows across the hotel room walls. Captain Jackson was not finished. "Major," he continued, his voice crisp over the encrypted line. "The private equity firm holding your husband's debt is notorious for aggressive asset seizure. They do not care about family logistics. They care about liquidity. The promissory note Jamal signed has a hard default date of the 15th of next month. If he does not produce $1.5 million by then, they will take the warehouses, the trucks, the inventory, and the family estate. That is why he needs Zuri's trust fund," I said, keeping my voice deadly calm so I would not wake my daughter. "The trust becomes accessible to him the second a family court judge grants him sole custody and deems me unfit." "Exactly," Jackson confirmed. "And the fake DNA clinic is the cornerstone of his unfit mother narrative." Loretta registered the holding company under her maiden name 3 weeks ago. They leased a vacant storefront, printed official-looking letterhead, and fabricated a paternity test to prove infidelity. They are banking on the shock value to push an emergency ex parte order through before you can mount a defense. "They made one massive miscalculation," I said. "What is that?" Jackson asked. "They committed perjury in a federal and state jurisdiction simultaneously." I tapped the touchpad, waking up my laptop screen. "Jackson, I need you to draft a comprehensive dossier of every piece of financial evidence you just uncovered. I want the holding company registration, the lease agreement for the fake clinic, and the promissory note with the offshore firm. Do not file it yet. We are going to let Jamal walk into that courtroom and swear under oath that his documents are authentic. We are going to let him dig his own grave." "Understood, Major. What about the military side?" He filed a formal complaint with the base commander alleging moral turpitude and child abandonment. That is going to trigger an automatic inquiry. "I am handling Colonel Thomas first thing in the morning," I replied. "I will not let Jamal weaponize my uniform. Have that dossier ready by 0800. I ended the call and set the phone down. Sleep was no longer a biological necessity, it was a luxury I could not afford. I spent the remaining hours of the dark morning finalizing my tactical plan. I drafted a timeline of Jamal's financial ruin, cross-referencing it with the exact dates he began acting erratic at home. The sudden arguments over my deployments, the sudden insistence that I should resign my commission and be a stay-at-home mother. It was all a calculated psychological campaign to gain control. He never wanted a wife. He wanted a shield against his own failures. When dawn finally broke, I moved with practiced efficiency. I dressed in my immaculate service uniform, checking every pin and ribbon in the mirror. I secured Zuri in her carrier and packed her tactical diaper bag. We were out of the hotel room by 6:30. I dropped Zuri off at the Secure on Base Child Development Center. The facility required military identification and biometric scans for entry and exit, Jamal had absolutely zero clearance to even pass the front gate of the base, let alone access this building. Zuri was surrounded by military police and secure protocols. I marched directly to the command headquarters. Colonel Thomas was a hardened combat veteran who did not tolerate nonsense from his officers or civilians. I requested an immediate audience and stood at parade rest in front of his massive oak desk. Major Kendra, the colonel, barked, looking up from a stack of reports. I received a highly disturbing communication from your husband last night. He is alleging severe misconduct. He claims you have abandoned your child and engaged in behavior unbecoming of an officer. He attached a paternity test as evidence. Sir, I said, my voice echoing off the paneled walls. With all due respect to the chain of command, my husband is a desperate man attempting to execute a hostile financial takeover of my daughter's trust fund. The allegations are entirely fabricated, and the document he submitted to your office is a forged instrument created by a fake medical clinic. Colonel Thomas set his pen down slowly. His eyes narrowed. That is a bold statement, Major. You are accusing a civilian of filing false reports to a military commander. I am not just accusing him, sir. I am proving it. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out the physical dossier Captain Jackson had securely printed for me 10 minutes prior. I placed it squarely on the center of the colonel's desk. Page 1 is the business registration for the DNA clinic he cited, I instructed. You will see it was incorporated 21 days ago by Loretta, Jamal's mother, using her maiden name. Page 3 contains the lease agreement for an abandoned storefront. Page 5 is a financial audit of Jamal's logistics company, proving he is $1.5 million in debt to an offshore equity firm with a default date approaching in 2 weeks. He needs me dishonorably discharged and stripped of custody so he can access a $4 million trust left to my daughter by my late father. Colonel Thomas opened the folder. He read through the documents with silent, terrifying speed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The military takes a very dim view of civilians attempting to manipulate its officers through fraud. When the colonel finally looked up, his expression was pure steel. Your husband has made a profound tactical error, Major. He attempted to use the United States military as a blunt instrument in a domestic dispute. He paused, closing the folder. The inquiry against you is officially dismissed. However, I am forwarding this entire packet to the base Judge Advocate General. We will pursue federal charges for submitting fraudulent documents to a military installation. Thank you, sir, I said, maintaining my rigid posture. But I need to ask that you delay the federal charges for exactly 48 hours. Colonel Thomas raised an eyebrow. Why the delay? Because Sir Jamal has a preliminary custody hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning in civilian family court. I want him to stand before a family court judge and swear under penalty of perjury that his fake DNA test is real. Once he commits perjury on the record, I will drop the hammer. I want him stripped of all credibility before we initiate the federal strike. A slow, grim smile spread across the colonel's face. He recognized a flawless ambush strategy when he saw one. Request granted, Major. Execute your operation. I saluted, executed a crisp about-face, and marched out of the headquarters. The military flank was completely secure. Now I needed to prepare for the civilian battlefield. Captain Jackson was brilliant with military law, but family court was a different beast. I needed a civilian shark. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number my late father had given me years ago. It belonged to Victoria Sterling, a high-powered, relentless family law attorney who specialized in destroying wealthy, manipulative spouses. She charged an astronomical retainer, and she never lost. Victoria answered on the second ring. Her voice was sharp and impatient. This is Sterling. Victoria, this is Kendra. You represented my father's estate during the trust negotiations. I need your services immediately. Kendra, Victoria's tone instantly shifted to smooth professional interest. I remember you. What is the situation? My husband is attempting to seize my daughter's $4 million trust fund using a forged DNA test, a fake medical clinic, and fabricated claims of child abandonment. We have a preliminary hearing tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I have a comprehensive dossier proving his financial insolvency and the fraud. I could practically hear Victoria smiling through the phone receiver. "Oh, Kendra, you are speaking my absolute favorite language. Bring the dossier to my office in 20 minutes. We are going to make your husband regret the day he learned how to sign his own name." I climbed back into my Jeep, gripping the steering wheel. Jamal thought he was the smartest person in the room. He thought his mother's fake clinic and his empty threats would break my spirit and force me into submission. He was about to walk into a courtroom completely blind to the fact that I had already rigged the entire building with explosives. The real war was not going to be fought in the living room. It was going to be fought under oath. The sun had not yet crested the horizon when I pulled my Jeep onto the cracked, uneven asphalt of Industrial Boulevard. Jackson had provided the raw intelligence over our encrypted call, but raw intelligence is for military strategists. A civilian family court judge required a legally admissible chain of custody. I needed physical, verifiable evidence that I had procured myself. I parked the Jeep across the street from the address printed on the top of Jamal's fabricated DNA test. I left the engine running and the headlights off. I sat in the darkness observing the location. It was not a medical district. It was not even a functional commercial zone. It was a severely dilapidated strip mall that looked like it had been abandoned for the better part of a decade. To my left, a flickering neon sign hummed violently over the barred windows of a discount liquor store. To my right sat a laundromat with half its windows boarded up with rotting plywood. And right in the center sat Suite 4, the supposed home of the Regional DNA Testing Center. The absolute sheer arrogance of their plan was staggering. Jamal and his mother had not even bothered to rent a believable facade. They assumed my emotional devastation over the infidelity accusations would blind me to the logistical impossibilities of their documentation. They expected me to be a weeping, hysterical wife entirely incapable of verifying basic facts. I put the Jeep in gear and rolled slowly into the strip mall parking lot, parking horizontally across 3 faded spaces directly in front of Suite 4. I stepped out of the vehicle into the crisp morning air. I reached into my tactical bag and pulled out my high-definition camera. I did not use a standard smartphone. I needed metadata that no high-priced lawyer could ever question. I approached the storefront with the methodical precision of a crime scene investigator. The glass door was coated in a thick layer of grime. A generic faded for lease sign hung crookedly on the inside of the glass. There was no medical signage. There was no reception desk. Through the dirty windows I could see exposed wiring hanging from the drop ceiling and a concrete floor covered in dead leaves and trash. I raised the camera. I took a wide establishing shot of the entire strip mall, ensuring the liquor store and the street signs were clearly visible in the frame. I moved closer and took tightly framed macro shots of the suite numbers. I placed my military identification card against the glass door and photographed it to establish undeniable proof of scale and location. Every single image I captured was automatically embedded with a secure timestamp and encrypted geolocation coordinates. I spent 10 minutes completely documenting the physical impossibility of Jamal's claims. By the time I finished, I had 50 high-resolution photographs proving that the medical clinic that allegedly processed my husband's DNA sample was nothing more than an empty rat-infested concrete box. I walked back to the Jeep and climbed into the driver's seat, locking the doors. The physical perimeter was secure. Now I needed to lock down the digital paper trail. I pulled my secure laptop from my bag and rested it against the steering wheel. I connected to my encrypted mobile hotspot and opened a specialized browser. Jackson had given me the endpoint, but I needed to walk the digital path myself to generate the admissible search records. I navigated directly to the Secretary of State Corporate Registry database. I typed Regional DNA Testing Center into the active business search bar. The system processed for a fraction of a second before rendering a single result. It was a limited liability company. I clicked on the corporate filing history. The date of incorporation glared back at me from the screen. The LLC had been legally registered exactly 21 days ago. I leaned back against the leather seat of my Jeep. 21 days ago, I was in the middle of a highly classified forward deployment. 21 days ago, Jamal was sending me text messages complaining about how much he missed me and asking when my combat pay would hit our joint account. While he was typing sweet words to his deployed wife, he was actively filing fraudulent corporate paperwork to steal our daughter's future. I dug deeper into the public registry. I pulled the Articles of Organization for the LLC. The listed business address was the empty suite I was currently parked in front of. But the registered agent, the person legally responsible for the corporate entity, was not listed as Jamal. The registered agent was a secondary entity called the Higgins Logistics Holding Group. I opened a new tab and ran a secondary search on Higgins Logistics Holding Group. The corporate veil they tried to construct was laughably thin. They had used a basic nested LLC structure, a tactic commonly used by amateur fraudsters trying to hide their assets from creditors. I bypassed the standard public view and used a specialized military intelligence script to pull the original formation documents for the holding company. The screen populated with a scanned PDF of the original signature page. There in bold black ink was the name of the managing director, Loretta Higgins. Higgins was my mother-in-law's maiden name. A cold, deeply satisfying calm washed over me. Loretta had always hated me. From the day Jamal introduced us, she had viewed my independence as a direct threat. She was a woman who believed a wife existed solely to serve her husband and manage his household. She constantly made passive-aggressive comments about my uniform, my combat boots, and my refusal to quit my career to help Jamal run his failing delivery trucks. During our wedding reception, Loretta had pulled me aside and told me that a strong woman will only end up breaking a weak man. She demanded I shrink myself so Jamal could feel tall. I refused. From that moment on, she treated me like an enemy combatant occupying her son's life. But I never imagined her disdain would escalate to federal fraud. She had actively conspired to fabricate a medical clinic, forge legal documents, and orchestrate a campaign to strip a decorated military officer of her child. She wanted that $4 million trust fund just as badly as Jamal did. They were going to use Zuri's money to bail out the family business and maintain their illusion of suburban wealth. I systematically downloaded the Articles of Organization, the registered agent history, the cross-referenced holding company files, and the digital signature pages. I organized them into a pristine digital folder labeled Exhibit A. I connected my camera, downloaded the timestamps, photographs, and added them to the file. I had everything. I had the motive. I had the weapon. I had the digital fingerprints of every single person involved in the conspiracy. I closed the laptop and placed it securely back into my tactical bag. I looked out the windshield at the abandoned storefront one last time. Jamal and Loretta thought they had executed a brilliant tactical maneuver. They thought filing an emergency ex parte motion in a quiet suburban family court would blindside me. They assumed I would be too busy defending my reputation against the infidelity charges to look at the corporate registry of the clinic that issued the test. I shifted the Jeep into drive. It was 7:30 in the morning. I had an hour and a half before I needed to be sitting in Victoria Sterling's high-rise law office. I merged back onto the main road, heading toward the city center. I did not feel an ounce of panic or heartbreak. I felt the absolute ruthless clarity of a soldier who had just caught the enemy marching blindly into a kill zone. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung open, and the stale air of the municipal justice system washed over me. I walked down the center aisle with the measured, rhythmic stride of a soldier entering hostile territory. I wore my Class A dress uniform. Every brass button was polished to a mirror shine, every ribbon perfectly aligned, and the fabric pressed into razor-sharp creases. I was not walking into this room as a victim. I was walking in as a decorated officer of the United States military. Flanking my right side was Captain Jackson. While Victoria Sterling was rapidly mobilizing her legal team in the background to dismantle Jamal's corporate structures, Jackson had specifically requested to take the lead on this preliminary custody hearing. As a judge advocate general officer, he carried the full weight of the federal government into the civilian courtroom. He wore his uniform with the same immaculate precision as I did, carrying a single slim leather portfolio. We did not speak. We did not need to. The battle plan was already locked in. Jamal was seated at the petitioner table. He was wearing a custom-tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a subdued navy tie. He had clearly spent hours perfecting his appearance to strike the exact balance between a successful businessman and a devastated, heartbroken father. His hair was perfectly faded, his posture was slumped in calculated sorrow, and he kept his hands clasped tightly on the wooden table. Sitting in the gallery directly behind him was Loretta. She was dabbing the corners of her eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the role of the traumatized grandmother. When I walked past their table, Jamal looked up. He expected me to look haggard, exhausted, or terrified. He expected me to glare at him with burning rage. I gave him absolutely nothing. I looked through him as if he were a piece of cheap furniture. Seated next to Jamal was Richard Vance. The sleazy attorney looked exactly as I had anticipated. His suit was expensive but poorly fitted, and he had a sheen of nervous sweat on his forehead. He shuffled a thick stack of papers, trying to project an air of disorganized brilliance. Judge Harrison, a stern-looking woman with silver hair pulled into a tight knot, took her seat at the bench and called the court to order. She looked down at the docket and then peered over her glasses at our respective tables. This is an emergency ex parte hearing regarding the custody of a minor child. Judge Harrison stated, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. Mr. Vance, your client filed the emergency motion. You may proceed. Vance stood up, adjusting his tie and puffing out his chest. Your Honor, we are here today because my client is a broken man. Jamal is a dedicated, loving father who has been forced into an impossible situation. He has single-handedly provided a stable, nurturing environment for his infant daughter, while his wife, Major Kendra, has been chronically absent under the guise of military deployments. Vance paused, letting the accusation hang in the air. He paced a few steps to his right, intentionally blocking my line of sight to the judge. But chronic absence is not the primary reason we requested this emergency hearing, Your Honor. We are here because my client recently uncovered a pattern of severe moral turpitude and deception that calls into question Major Kendra's basic fitness as a parent. In the gallery, I could hear Loretta let out a soft, theatrical sniffle. Jamal lowered his head, staring at his hands in a display of profound agony. My client had growing suspicions regarding his wife's conduct during her deployments. Vance continued, his voice rising in dramatic cadence. Suspicions of severe infidelity. In an effort to protect his family and ascertain the truth, he sought out a medical clinic to conduct a paternity test on the minor child. The results were returned to him yesterday. Vance reached down to his table and picked up a single sheet of paper. He held it up as if it were the Holy Grail. Your Honor, this certified laboratory document proves definitively that my client is not the biological father of the child he has been raising. Major Kendra has engaged in a sustained, deceitful affair, resulting in a child outside of this marriage. A woman capable of this level of deception and moral bankruptcy cannot be trusted with the physical or legal custody of an infant. We are asking the court to grant immediate sole custody to my client to protect the child from a mother who is entirely unstable. Vance walked forward and formally handed the fabricated DNA test to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge. The entire courtroom held its breath. Jamal finally looked up at me, a smug, victorious glint flashing in his eyes for a fraction of a second. He had delivered his killing blow. He had laid the trap exactly as he planned, expecting me to explode. He expected me to jump out of my chair, scream fraud, and sound like a hysterical, desperate woman trying to cover up her lies. I sat perfectly still. My hands rested flat on the table. My breathing remained slow and controlled. Judge Harrison reviewed the document. She frowned, her eyes scanning the bright red 0% probability printed on the page. She slowly lowered the paper and looked directly at Captain Jackson and me. Counsel, Judge Harrison said, addressing Jackson. Your client is facing very serious allegations. Do you have a response to this document? Captain Jackson stood up. He did not rush. He buttoned his uniform jacket, smoothed the lapels, and looked up at the judge with an expression of absolute calm authority. He did not raise his voice. He did not object. He did not utter the word fraud. Your Honor. Captain Jackson began, his tone respectful but firm. We acknowledge that the petitioner has submitted what purports to be a medical document. We understand the gravity of the claims being made by Mr. Vance. Vance smirked, sinking back into his chair, thinking we were conceding defeat. Jamal let out a slow exhale of relief. However, Jackson continued, pivoting smoothly. The minor child in question is a registered military dependent. She currently receives comprehensive federal benefits healthcare coverage through TRICARE and is enrolled in the Defense Enrollment Eligibility Reporting System. Jackson took a step out from behind our table, commanding the center of the room. The Department of Defense takes any allegations regarding the paternity and biological status of a registered military dependent extremely seriously. Because federal resources and military trust funds are directly tied to this child's biological lineage, standard military protocol dictates that we cannot rely on a private third-party assessment procured outside of a verified chain of custody. Judge Harrison leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. What are you suggesting, Captain? We are not here to waste the court's time arguing over a single piece of paper, Jackson stated. We simply request that this court follow established federal and state verification protocols. We ask Your Honor to order a court-mandated supervised DNA test to be conducted immediately at a state-approved federal testing facility. A strict legal chain of custody must be maintained by medical professionals. If Mr. Vance's document is indeed accurate, a court-ordered test will simply confirm his claims without any shadow of a doubt. Vance shot up from his chair so fast it nearly tipped over backward. Objection, Your Honor. This is a blatant stalling tactic. My client has already provided a certified test. Subjecting him to another test is a waste of judicial resources and an insult to his trauma. We have the proof right here. Judge Harrison slammed her gavel down, instantly silencing the sleazy lawyer. Mr. Vance, sit down, she snapped. Vance froze, his mouth hanging open before he slowly lowered himself back into his seat. Captain Jackson's request is entirely reasonable and legally sound, Judge Harrison declared, looking down at Vance with open irritation. Given the severe nature of your allegations and the federal implications regarding the child's military benefits, a court-supervised test is the most appropriate course of action. If your client's document is valid, a secondary supervised test will only strengthen your position. I see no reason to deny this request. She picked up her pen and began writing on the docket sheet. I am ordering an immediate supervised DNA test to be conducted at the state-authorized facility downtown, Judge Harrison announced. Both parties will submit to testing within 48 hours. The results will be sent directly to this court. I am deferring any rulings on temporary custody until those official results are returned. We will reconvene in exactly 5 days. The color instantly drained from Jamal's face. His rich brown skin turned a sickly shade of ash gray. The confident posture he had maintained all morning completely shattered. His shoulders slumped, and his hands began to tremble violently on the wooden table. In the gallery behind him, Loretta let out a sharp, audible gasp. She dropped her lace handkerchief. Her hands gripped the wooden pew in front of her so tightly her knuckles turned white. She stared at the back of her son's head, absolute terror radiating from her wide eyes. They had built their entire ambush around a fake clinic and a fabricated document. They never planned for a court-mandated federal test. They knew a supervised test would expose the 0% probability as a complete lie. And more importantly, they knew that once the official test proved Jamal was the biological father, their fabricated document would become undeniable evidence of perjury and fraud. Captain Jackson sat back down next to me, matching my perfect posture. We did not celebrate. We simply packed our briefcases in silent unison. I turned my head and looked directly at Jamal. He slowly turned to face me, his chest heaving as panic suffocated him. The realization of his fatal mistake was finally crashing down on him. The trap he built had just snapped shut around his own neck. I held his terrified gaze for 3 long seconds, offering him nothing but cold, tactical silence before I turned around and marched out of the courtroom. The heavy brass doors of the courtroom swung shut behind me, cutting off the sound of Richard Vance frantically whispering to his client. Captain Jackson walked beside me in perfect synchronization. We did not exchange a single word until we were secured inside the soundproofed rear cabin of Victoria Sterling's black town car waiting for us at the curb. Victoria was already inside reviewing a thick stack of printed financial audits. She did not look up when we entered. She simply tapped a manicured fingernail against a spreadsheet and smiled a sharp, predatory smile. "That was a masterclass in judicial maneuvering, Captain," she said, her eyes scanning the columns of numbers. "You completely neutralized their primary weapon and put them on a ticking clock. Jamal has 5 days until the federal clinic processes that court-ordered DNA swab. He knows the results will expose his forgery." Jackson settled into the leather seat and unbuttoned his uniform jacket. 5 days is a lifetime for a man drowning in offshore debt, Jackson replied. He will not wait for the axe to fall. He is going to pivot, and he is going to do it recklessly. I stared out the tinted window as the city skyline blurred past us. "That is exactly what we are counting on," I said. We arrived at Victoria's high-rise law firm and moved directly into her corner office. The room was a monument to corporate warfare, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district and a massive mahogany conference table. I placed my tactical bag on the table and pulled out the physical copies of Jamal's corporate filings. I arranged them into a neat grid. "We know Jamal's timeline," I began, addressing both lawyers. "The private equity firm holding his $1.5 million debt has set a hard default date for the 15th. That is exactly 14 days from today. He initiated this entire fraudulent custody battle to seize Zuri's $4 million trust fund before those creditors seize his family logistics business. Now that we have stalled the custody hearing with the mandated DNA test, he is completely out of time." Victoria leaned forward, resting her elbows on the mahogany surface. "He cannot afford to let that DNA test proceed," she stated. "Once the court receives official confirmation that he is the biological father, his entire narrative of you being an unfit, cheating mother collapses. He will face severe criminal charges for the forged clinic documents. He needs a shortcut. He needs you to surrender custody voluntarily before that test happens." "How do we make him think he has won?" Jackson asked, crossing his arms. I looked at the digital clock on my laptop screen. "We give him a golden bridge," I said. "We offer him exactly what he wants, but we lace the bridge with explosives. We are going to make him perjure himself on federal financial documents. To spring the trap, I needed a conduit. Jamal was currently operating in a state of blind panic, making him unpredictable. I could not approach him directly. Any communication from me or Victoria would be heavily scrutinized by his sleazy lawyer. I needed someone inside his camp who was arrogant enough to believe they were controlling the narrative. I needed Brooke. My sister-in-law was the ultimate opportunist. She had visited my hotel room under the guise of maternal concern, attempting to execute a soft breach by offering iced coffee and fake sympathy. Brooke fancied herself a master manipulator. She believed she possessed a unique psychological insight into my vulnerabilities. She thought her sweet facade masked her vicious intentions. I was going to leverage her staggering narcissism against her own family. Malik, her husband, was too weak to stop her from meddling. He knew Jamal was in too deep, but Brooke thrived on the drama of being the family savior. I opened a blank email on my secure server. I did not use my military address. I used an old personal civilian account that Brooke had contacted me on years ago. The subject line needed to be entirely unassuming. I typed the words regarding the hotel visit. I took a deep breath, dropping my rigid military persona and channeling the exhausted, broken woman they so desperately wanted me to be. "Brooke," I wrote, my keystrokes slow and deliberate. "You were right. I am too tired to fight this battle anymore. The military inquiry Colonel Thomas initiated this morning is threatening to ruin my entire career, and the media scrutiny is going to destroy Zuri's future. I cannot sleep. I cannot eat. I just want this nightmare to end." I stared at the screen, ensuring the tone struck the perfect balance of desperation and defeat. I continued the draft. You mentioned yesterday that Jamal would drop the moral turpitude charges and retract his complaints with my commanding officer if I signed the temporary custody agreement. Tell him I am ready to concede. I will sign the ex parte order granting him temporary physical custody of Zuri so he can manage her accounts and stabilize the family business. I just want peace for my daughter. I hit the enter key twice, separating the bait from the hook. I am instructing Victoria Sterling to draft the surrender documents this afternoon. She has one minor administrative requirement before she will release the paperwork. She needs Jamal to sign a standard sworn financial disclosure affidavit. Victoria insists it is a routine legal formality required to close out and separate our joint checking accounts before custody is officially transferred. Once Jamal signs the financial disclosure and files it with the court, I will sign over custody. Please talk to him, Brooke. Make him end this war. I read the email one final time. It was a masterpiece of psychological camouflage. The financial disclosure sounded like a boring, routine administrative hurdle. It sounded like the last desperate gasp of a lawyer trying to do basic due diligence for a client who had already surrendered. I clicked send. The trap was set. Now we simply had to wait for the enemy to devour the bait. Brooke would receive that email and immediately feel a euphoric rush of triumph. She would run to Jamal claiming she had successfully broken my spirit during her hotel visit. She would present the email as his absolute salvation. For Jamal, looking down the barrel of a federal DNA test and an offshore debt default, this email was a miracle. It offered him immediate access to the $4 million trust fund. All he had to do was sign a standard financial disclosure to finalize the separation of our basic household accounts. But a standard financial disclosure requires a sworn, itemized list of all active debts and liabilities. Jamal was hiding a massive toxic debt. If he listed the $1.5 million offshore private equity loan on the court document, the family court judge would immediately freeze all asset transfers, citing severe financial instability. His entire plan to access Zuri's money would fail instantly. If he hid the debt, he would be lying under oath on a sworn federal and state document. Driven by sheer greed and a ticking clock, he would choose the lie. He would assume that because I was surrendering, I would never audit his financial paperwork. He would assume he had won. Victoria Jackson and I sat in the sprawling corner office for 6 hours. The silence was absolute. We drank black coffee and reviewed the holding company ledgers, ensuring every piece of our counterattack was perfectly aligned. We traced every shell company tied to Loretta's maiden name. We mapped out the exact corporate structure they had built to hide their impending bankruptcy. At exactly 4:45 in the afternoon, the heavy wooden door of the office swung open. Victoria's paralegal stepped into the room carrying a thick sealed manila envelope bearing the gold foil logo of Richard Vance's law firm. A courier just dropped this off, the paralegal announced, placing the envelope directly in front of Victoria. They requested immediate confirmation of receipt. They stated time is of the essence regarding the custody transfer. Victoria dismissed the paralegal with a wave of her hand. She picked up a silver letter opener and sliced through the thick paper. She pulled out a stack of legal documents. The top page was a signed temporary custody agreement awaiting my signature. Beneath it was the standard sworn financial disclosure affidavit. Victoria flipped past the asset declarations, bypassing the checking accounts and the vehicles. She turned directly to page 4. Schedule B, Liabilities and Outstanding Debts. She placed the document flat on the mahogany table so Jackson and I could see it clearly. At the bottom of the page, Jamal's signature was scrawled in thick blue ink directly beneath the perjury warning clause. The notary stamp was pressed firmly next to his name, verifying his sworn oath. I looked at the itemized list of debts. Jamal had listed a small car loan and a lingering credit card balance from a family vacation 2 years ago. The section for corporate liabilities, private loans, and equity debt was completely blank. He had deliberately concealed the $1.5 million offshore obligation. Captain Jackson leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. A slow, methodical smile touched the corners of his mouth. He just filed a fraudulent financial instrument under penalty of perjury, Jackson stated, his voice carrying the lethal weight of a military executioner. The trap is officially closed. He handed us the rope and he just tied his own noose. 5 days is exactly 120 hours. In military operations, that is an eternity. It is enough time to reposition an entire armored division across hostile terrain. For Jamal and his mother, it was 120 hours of suffocating, inevitable dread. I spent those 5 days maintaining my standard operational routine with absolute precision. I reported for duty at the intelligence unit, analyzing satellite telemetry and encrypting supply chain logistics. I picked Zuri up from the base child development center exactly on schedule. I fed her, bathed her, and read her bedtime stories. I did not lose a single second of sleep. I had outflanked the enemy and mapped their exact coordinates. Now all I had to do was show up and witness their unconditional surrender. The morning of the reconvened hearing brought a heavy torrential downpour to the city. Rain lashed against the high arched windows of the county courthouse, casting a gray pallor over the polished marble floors. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing the exact same Class A dress uniform I had worn previously. Every brass button was polished to a mirror shine, and my ribbons were perfectly aligned. Captain Jackson walked beside me, his stride matching mine. Victoria Sterling met us in the lobby, her heels clicking sharply against the wet stone. She carried her signature leather briefcase, looking like an apex predator smelling blood in the water. We bypassed the civilian metal detectors using our federal military identification and took the private elevator to the 4th floor. Courtroom 4B felt completely different today. The initial element of surprise that Jamal had banked on was entirely gone. The air was stale and thick with the distinct odor of desperation. Jamal and Richard Vance were already seated at the petitioner table. Jamal wore the same custom charcoal suit, but it looked wrinkled today, as if he had slept in it. He was sweating heavily. A thin sheen of perspiration coated his forehead, and his hands shook violently as he blindly shuffled through pointless legal pads. Behind him in the wooden gallery pews, Loretta sat rigid. She was not crying today. Her jaw was clenched so tightly I thought her teeth might shatter. Judge Harrison took the bench precisely at 9 o'clock. She did not offer pleasantries. She did not waste time looking around the room. She picked up a thick, sealed envelope bearing the official watermark and federal seal of the state-authorized DNA testing facility. The heavy silence in the room was absolute. Only the sound of the rain hitting the glass panes broke the quiet. Judge Harrison picked up her silver letter opener and sliced the heavy paper envelope open. She pulled out the multi-page certified laboratory report. Her eyes scanned the first document. She flipped to the second page, tracing the lines of data with her index finger. She flipped to the third page. She lowered the document slowly and looked directly at Jamal. Her expression was a mask of cold judicial fury. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, her voice dangerously low. "I hold in my hands the certified results directly from the federal laboratory. The biometric markers confirm with a 99.9% certainty that your client is the biological father of the minor child." Vance stood up. He looked like a man standing on the deck of a sinking ship, desperately trying to bail water with a paper cup. "Your Honor, my client was operating under severe emotional distress when we filed the initial motion. He was deeply misled by a private medical clinic. We officially withdraw our emergency motion for sole custody based on the initial paternity claims." Judge Harrison slammed her open hand flat against the mahogany bench. The sharp crack echoed through the courtroom. "You do not just get to simply withdraw, Mr. Vance," she stated, her voice rising in volume. "Your client submitted a fraudulent medical document to this court under penalty of perjury. He attempted to strip a decorated military officer of her child using fabricated evidence. This is an egregious and highly calculated abuse of the judicial system. I am denying your emergency motion for temporary custody entirely. Furthermore, I am ordering a full administrative investigation into the origins of the initial DNA document you submitted to my clerk 5 days ago. If I find that you or your client knowingly presented forged instruments to this court, I will personally see to it that federal fraud and perjury charges are filed before the week is over. Jamal buried his face in his trembling hands. He was hyperventilating, his shoulders heaving under his expensive suit jacket. The $1.5 million offshore debt was still hanging over his head like a guillotine, and now his only escape hatch was welded shut. The trust fund was untouchable. He was legally, financially, and completely trapped. Judge Harrison struck her gavel. We will reconvene for the standard divorce and asset separation proceedings next month. Until then, the current custody arrangement stands. Major Kendra retains primary physical custody. Court is adjourned. Captain Jackson packed his portfolio with slow, deliberate movements. Victoria Sterling simply smiled, a tight, triumphant line across her face. It was a complete legal bloodbath. I stood up, adjusted my uniform jacket, smoothed the fabric, and turned toward the center aisle. I did not look at Jamal. He was no longer a threat worthy of my attention. We pushed through the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the brightly lit courthouse hallway. The long corridor was crowded with court clerks, armed bailiffs, and dozens of other attorneys waiting for their respective dockets. I was halfway to the elevator bank when the heavy doors of courtroom 4B crashed open behind me, hitting the wall with a loud bang. Loretta charged out into the hallway. The facade of the sweet, concerned suburban grandmother was completely gone. She was practically vibrating with unhinged rage, her face flushed a deep, mottled purple. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my back. She hacked the system, Loretta screamed. Her shrill voice echoed off the marble walls, instantly silencing the entire crowded corridor. I stopped walking, but I did not turn around. I simply stood at attention, my posture flawless, my hands resting naturally at my sides. You all think she is so innocent, Loretta continued, ranting at the top of her lungs, pacing erratically in circles. She used her military connections. She is an intelligence officer. She hacked the federal laboratory database and changed the results. That is the only possible explanation. She altered the DNA markers to trap my son. She is a criminal. She is committing domestic treason. I turned my head slightly. I looked past Loretta to the civilian court clerk standing behind the reinforced glass of the administrative windows. I looked at the two armed bailiffs standing near the metal detectors. They were staring at Loretta with expressions of utter disbelief and mounting professional concern. A woman in a tailored pastel suit screaming about military cyber warfare and hacked federal DNA databases in the middle of a county courthouse did not look like a concerned citizen seeking justice. She looked completely mentally unstable and deeply paranoid. Jamal rushed out of the courtroom, sprinting toward his mother. He grabbed her arm, trying to physically pull her away from the center of the hallway. "Mom, stop it," he hissed, looking around at the dozens of staring professionals. "You are making it worse. We have to leave right now." "Get your hands off me," Loretta shrieked, slapping his hand away with surprising force. "She is destroying our family. She is stealing our money. Someone needs to investigate her security clearance. Someone needs to call the Pentagon and tell them what she is doing." I did not say a single word. I did not engage in her chaotic theater. I did not take the bait she was so desperately dangling. Engaging with an irrational enemy only validates their delusion. I simply turned my head back toward the elevator bank. I reached out and pressed the call button with steady, measured pressure. The stainless steel doors opened with a soft electronic chime. Victoria Jackson and I stepped inside the empty car. As the elevator doors slid shut, gradually cutting off Loretta's hysterical screaming, I knew the psychological warfare phase of this operation was officially over. I had established the undisputed high ground and let them broadcast their own instability to the entire judicial staff. They had failed to breach my defenses, and now they were tearing each other apart in the aftermath. The next phase was no longer about defending my position. It was about total offensive mobilization. It was time to spring the final trap and burn their failing logistics empire to the ground. We returned to Victoria Sterling's office while the adrenaline was still coursing through the air. The heavy oak door sealed us inside the soundproofed room, and Victoria immediately walked behind her massive mahogany desk. She did not sit down. She opened her laptop and brought up a secure banking portal. My father had been a man who planned for every conceivable catastrophe. When he established Zuri's trust fund, he structured it with the paranoia of a seasoned military tactician. He had never trusted Jamal. He saw right through the custom suits and the polished corporate vocabulary. He knew Jamal viewed people as assets to be leveraged. Because of that suspicion, my father had embedded a dead man switch directly into the financial architecture of the $4 million account. It was outlined in Section 7, Clause C of the trust documents. If the physical or legal custody of the minor beneficiary was ever formally contested in a court of law, the entire trust would instantly and irrevocably freeze. Furthermore, the clause mandated that any such legal dispute automatically triggered an immediate federal audit of the trust and any individuals attempting to gain access to its capital. By filing his emergency ex parte motion for custody, Jamal had unknowingly stepped directly onto a financial landmine. "Do it," I said, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city. Victoria typed rapidly. She uploaded the certified court docket from Judge Harrison, proving an active custody dispute had been initiated by Jamal. She attached a formal legal declaration invoking Section 7, Clause C. She hit submit. The confirmation screen flashed green. The $4 million was locked down. Not even a federal judge could authorize a withdrawal without a comprehensive 6-month IRS review. Jamal was completely locked out. The offshore private equity firm holding Jamal's $1.5 million debt did not operate with the sluggish pace of a local credit union. They were ruthless, aggressive, and entirely unsympathetic. When the 15th of the month arrived, and Jamal failed to wire the minimum payment, they executed their default protocols immediately. Jamal had spent weeks assuring them that he was days away from securing a massive influx of capital from his daughter's trust. When the creditors ran a background check on the asset and discovered the federal freeze, they realized Jamal had been playing them. They retaliated with brutal efficiency. The family logistics company that Jamal had used as collateral was heavily leveraged. The creditors filed an immediate commercial lien against the business, freezing their operating accounts. Within 24 hours, the logistics company could not process payroll. They could not pay their vendors. The entire corporate facade was collapsing in real time. The first shockwave hit Loretta 2 days later. Loretta treated the Bellevue Country Club as her personal kingdom. She spent her afternoons on the terrace, sipping mimosas and loudly complaining to her wealthy friends about how military women lacked maternal instincts. She had built her entire social identity around the illusion of old money and corporate success. She was in the middle of a luncheon when a heavy industrial flatbed tow truck backed directly into the club's pristine valet circle. The driver, a massive man in a high-visibility vest, bypassed the panicked valet attendants and walked straight up to Loretta's customized white Mercedes SUV. He dropped a heavy steel hook onto the front axle. Loretta saw the commotion from the terrace. She dropped her crystal champagne flute and marched down the grand staircase, her high heels clicking furiously against the stone. "Take your hands off my vehicle!" Loretta screamed, pointing a manicured finger at the tow truck driver. "Do you have any idea who I am? I will have you arrested for grand theft." The driver did not even blink. He pulled a clipboard from his vest and handed her a bright yellow carbon copy of a commercial repossession order. "This vehicle is leased under Premier Family Logistics," he stated loudly, his voice carrying effortlessly across the quiet valet circle. "The corporate accounts are in default. The leasing agency ordered an immediate asset seizure. Please step back, Mom." Loretta's face drained of color. The other women from her luncheon had gathered at the edge of the terrace, watching the spectacle with wide, fascinated eyes. Loretta had spent years treating me like I was beneath her, pretending her family possessed a superior lineage. Now she was standing in the middle of her exclusive country club watching a repo man haul away her luxury car because her son had bankrupted their company. She covered her face with her designer handbag and fled toward the clubhouse, leaving her pride scattered on the pavement. But the creditors did not stop with luxury vehicles. Jamal's financial deception ran much deeper than Loretta realized. In order to secure the massive offshore loan he had cross-collateralized the debt, He had forged corporate resolutions naming his brother Malik as a co-guarantor. Malik had no idea he was legally bound to a toxic $1.5 million liability. Brooke was hosting a neighborhood association meeting in her immaculate suburban living room. She thrived on controlling her environment, projecting the image of the perfect organized wife. She had just finished serving organic pastries to her neighbors when heavy knocking rattled her front door. Brooke opened the door expecting a late arrival. Instead, she found two men in dark gray suits standing on her porch. They did not smile. They were not selling anything. "Are you Brooke Sterling?" one of the men asked. "Yes," Brooke replied, her customer service smile faltering. The man handed her a thick stack of legal documents, bound by a heavy rubber band. "You are formally served," he stated. Brooke looked down at the paperwork. The bold black letters at the top of the page read, "Notice of impending foreclosure and asset seizure." The creditors had placed a direct lien on her home. Because Malik's name was on the defaulted corporate loan, their personal property was now targeted for liquidation. The blood rushed to Brooke's ears. Her neighbors were staring at her from the living room, their conversations abruptly halted. The perfect, pristine life she had lorded over everyone was being shredded on her own front porch. The process servers turned and walked back to their unmarked sedan, leaving Brooke trembling in the doorway. 30 minutes later, my phone rang. I was sitting at my kitchen island reviewing Zuri's preschool schedule. The caller ID displayed Brooke's name. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. Kendra Brooke screamed into the receiver. She was completely hysterical, her breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. "What did you do?" "Men just came to my house. They put a lien on my home. Malik's accounts are frozen. Jamal will not answer his phone. You have to fix this." I kept my voice absolutely flat. I stripped away every ounce of emotion and spoke with the chilling precision of an intelligence officer giving a situational report. "I did not do anything, Brooke," I replied. "Jamal took out a massive offshore loan to cover his failing business. He used your husband's name to secure the debt. When he tried to steal my daughter's trust fund to pay it off, he triggered a federal freeze. Your family built a house out of matches and you handed Jamal the lighter." "But you surrendered!" Brooke cried, her voice cracking with desperation. "You sent me that email. You said you were signing over custody. You said you were done fighting. We were supposed to get the money." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "You thought you were playing chess, Brooke. You thought you could manipulate me in a hotel room and orchestrate my downfall. You were never playing chess. You were walking blindly into a kill zone. I sent you that email because I knew your ego would not let you ignore it. I knew you would run to Jamal and convince him to sign that financial disclosure." Brooke gasped, a sharp intake of air as the realization finally hit her. She had delivered the poison directly to her own family. He lied on a federal affidavit because he thought he had already won. I continued. He hid his debt. Now the trust is frozen. His creditors are liquidating his assets, and the court is investigating him for perjury. You wanted to help him destroy me, Brooke. Congratulations. You just helped him destroy all of you. I did not wait for her to respond. I pressed the end call button and placed the phone face down on the granite counter. The house was perfectly quiet. The storm they had tried to bring to my doorstep had been completely redirected. They were drowning in the flood they had created, and I was not going to throw them a lifeline. The sharp buzz of the intercom on my desk cut through the quiet hum of the intelligence unit. I pressed the receiver button without looking away from the encrypted logistics report glowing on my monitor. "Major, we have a situation at the main gate." The voice of Sergeant Miller, the lead military police officer on duty, was tight with professional restraint. "There is a civilian here demanding immediate access to the secure sector. He claims to be your husband. He is highly agitated and refusing to comply with standard entry protocols." I did not rush. I saved my files, locked my workstation, and grabbed my cover. "Detain him in the primary holding area of the Visitor Control Center." I instructed, my voice devoid of any inflection. "Do not grant him access to the base interior under any circumstances. I am on my way." The walk from the intelligence building to the main gate took exactly 8 minutes. I moved with the measured, deliberate stride of an officer inspecting a newly secured perimeter. The midday sun beat down on the concrete walkways, casting harsh shadows against the razor wire and reinforced barricades. This was my sanctuary. This was a federal military installation governed by absolute order and lethal force. Jamal was a creature of backroom deals, corporate manipulation and deceit. He had no power here. He had no leverage. He was a trespasser in a world that did not recognize his custom suits or his arrogant smile. When I pushed through the heavy steel doors of the visitor control center, the scene was exactly as I had anticipated. The room was divided by a thick wall of ballistic glass. On the secure side, two heavily armed MPs stood with their hands resting casually near their sidearms, watching the public waiting area with cold, detached precision. On the other side of the glass was Jamal. He was a complete wreck. The immaculate polished facade he had maintained for years had disintegrated entirely. His designer shirt was unbuttoned at the collar and dark patches of sweat stained his underarms. His hair was unkempt, and his eyes were wild and bloodshot, darting frantically around the sterile room. He was currently trying to run his usual charm offensive on a stoic female MP stationed at the entry desk. "Look, I am telling you, there has been a massive misunderstanding," Jamal said, leaning over the counter and attempting a desperate conspiratorial smile. "I just need 5 minutes with her. We are going through a messy divorce and she is just being emotional. You know how it is. Just pop the gate open and let me talk to my wife. I will make sure she does not give you any trouble." The MP did not blink. "Step back behind the yellow line, sir," she ordered, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of a direct command. "You do not have clearance. If you advance toward this desk again, you will be detained." Jamal's smile vanished, replaced instantly by a flash of entitled rage. "Do you know who I am?" he snapped, slamming his hand on the counter. "I am the CEO of Premier Family Logistics. I pay the taxes that fund your salary. I demand to see Major Kendra right now, or I am calling your commanding officer." I stepped up to the secure side of the ballistic glass. "He does not need to call anyone, Sergeant," I said calmly. "I am here." Jamal whipped around. The moment his eyes locked onto mine, the false bravado evaporated. He rushed toward the thick glass partition, pressing his hands flat against the reinforced surface. He looked like an animal trapped in an exhibit. "Kendra," he yelled, his voice muffled but audible through the integrated speaker system. "You have to fix this. You have to call your lawyers right now and lift that freeze on the trust fund." I stood perfectly still, my hands clasped loosely behind my back. I looked at him with the same clinical detachment I would use to assess a captured enemy combatant. "Are you out of your mind?" Jamal shouted, pounding a fist against the glass. The sharp sound echoed through the sterile lobby, prompting the two MPs to step closer to the partition. "They are destroying everything. The private equity firm seized my company this morning. They froze all the operating accounts. My mother just had her car dragged out of her country club in front of half the city. Brooke and Malik are being served with foreclosure notices because their house was tied to the corporate debt. You are ruining my family." I remained absolutely silent. I did not offer him a single syllable of justification or defense. The silence was a weapon, and I let it crush him. His anger, which had always been his primary tool for controlling me, suddenly lost its momentum. The rage drained out of his face, leaving behind a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The reality of his situation was finally overriding his narcissism. He was out of time. He was out of options. He was standing on federal property, screaming at a woman who held his entire life in her hands. The pivot was instantaneous and sickening to watch. Jamal's knees buckled slightly. His face contorted, and tears began to stream down his cheeks. The arrogant corporate predator transformed into a weeping, desperate child in the span of 3 seconds. "Please, Kendra," he sobbed, pressing his face closer to the glass. His breath fogged the surface. "I am begging you. You have to unfreeze Zuri's money. The creditors are not just taking the business. They are threatening me. These are not normal bankers. They are offshore private equity enforcers. If I do not wire that $1.5 million by the end of the week, they are going to ruin me. They are going to take everything I have ever built. They are going to put me in prison for financial fraud." He slid down the glass, dropping to his knees on the linoleum floor. "I know I made mistakes," he wept, looking up at me with pathetic, pleading eyes. "I know I hurt you. I was wrong to file those custody papers. I was wrong to lie about the paternity test. I will drop the divorce. I will do whatever you want. Just release the trust fund. Please. You are my wife. You are supposed to protect me. I will be completely ruined. You cannot do this to me." I looked down at the man I had once sworn to spend my life with. I remembered the years of subtle insults. I remembered the way he had dismissed my military service as a hobby. I remembered the smug, victorious smile he had worn in the courtroom when he thought he had successfully stolen my daughter using forged documents. He had tried to execute me professionally and personally. Now he wanted mercy. He was not going to get a single drop of it. I did not lean toward the glass. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at him and delivered the absolute truth. "You built the trap, Jamal." I stated, my voice carrying cleanly through the speaker. "I just locked the door." His eyes widened in shock as the finality of my words sank in. He opened his mouth to scream another plea, but I had already turned my back to the glass. I looked at Sergeant Miller, who was watching the exchange with professional detachment. "Sergeant," I said, my tone brisk and authoritative, "this civilian has no legitimate business on this installation. He is highly erratic and represents a potential security disruption. Escort him off the premises immediately. If he resists or attempts to return, you are authorized to place him under federal arrest for trespassing." "Yes, Major," Sergeant Miller replied, instantly snapping a sharp salute. I walked away from the partition without looking back. Behind me, the heavy, secure doors opened. I heard the scuffle of heavy boots on the linoleum. I heard Jamal scream my name, one final desperate time before the MPs physically grabbed him by the arms. "Get your hands off me!" Jamal yelled, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You cannot do this!" Kendra, Kendra, please." His cries were abruptly cut off as the heavy exterior doors of the visitor control center swung shut behind him. The MPs were dragging him out into the parking lot, hauling him away like garbage. The silence that fell over the lobby was immediate and profoundly satisfying. The air felt cleaner. The cancer that had infected my life for years had been surgically removed and discarded. I stepped out of the building and began the walk back to the intelligence unit. The rain clouds from the morning had completely cleared, leaving a bright, piercing blue sky. My uniform felt light. My mind was sharp and completely focused. I had successfully dismantled Jamal, Malik, and Brooke. They were financially crippled and turning on each other in their panic. There was only one target left on the board. As I walked along the perimeter fence, my secure civilian smartphone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and unlocked the screen. It was a digital invitation forwarded through a high society mailing list. The ornate gold script on the screen read, "You are cordially invited to the 25th Annual Women of Excellence Charity Gala, hosted by Loretta Sterling." I stopped walking and stared at the screen. A cold, predatory smile touched my lips. Loretta was bleeding out. The repossession of her luxury vehicle had humiliated her in front of her country club peers, but the impending collapse of the family logistics company threatened to destroy her entire existence. She needed capital immediately to save her fraudulent lifestyle. The Women of Excellence Gala was her crown jewel. It was an annual event where she gathered the wealthiest, most influential women in the city under the guise of philanthropy. I knew exactly what she was planning. She was going to use the gala as a front. She was going to corner her wealthy friends, ply them with expensive champagne, and quietly beg for emergency bridge loans to save the Sterling Empire. She was going to leverage her fake reputation to extract cash from people who had no idea her family was facing federal perjury and fraud investigations. She thought she could host a glittering party and simply smile her way out of total destruction. She thought she could hide the rot behind a designer gown and a crystal chandelier. She was wrong. I was going to walk into that ballroom. I was going to stand in the center of her fake kingdom, and I was going to tear the crown right off her head in front of everyone she was trying to swindle. I was going to burn her reputation to the ground permanently. I tapped the screen of my phone. I scrolled down past the elaborate menu options and the silent auction details. I found the electronic response button at the bottom of the invitation. I hit RSVP. I selected the option for attending. I locked the phone and slid it back into my pocket. The final battle lines were drawn. The gala was in 3 days and I was going to arrive dressed for war. The grand ballroom of the downtown Atlanta Ritz-Carlton was a suffocating display of manufactured wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over round tables draped in heavy ivory silk. The room was packed with the city's black elite. Venture capitalists, angel investors, and real estate moguls. They were sipping top-shelf champagne and picking at beluga caviar, while my estranged husband and his mother stood on a raised stage at the front of the room. Jamal was gripping a wireless microphone wearing a rented tuxedo that was slightly too tight across his shoulders. He was sweating profusely. The harsh stage lights reflected off the heavy sheen of perspiration coating his forehead, but he kept his white teeth bared in a desperate practiced smile. Beside him, Loretta wore a heavily beaded emerald gown, projecting the absolute picture of a triumphant matriarch. Behind them, a massive digital screen displayed a soaring bar graph under the bold logo of Premier Family Logistics. They were in the middle of their pitch, spinning a masterful web of lies about exponential expansion and lucrative federal contracts, begging these high society investors for the capital they needed to avoid total ruin. I stood outside the heavy mahogany double doors of the ballroom and took one final steadying breath. I did not wear an evening gown. I wore my immaculate Class A military dress uniform. The dark fabric was pressed into razor-sharp creases, and the brass buttons caught the dim light of the corridor. Every medal, every ribbon I had bled for, was perfectly aligned on my chest. I pushed the heavy doors open and stepped into the room. My entrance was completely silent, but the visual impact hit the room like a shockwave. The low hum of wealthy networking instantly died away. Heads turned one by one. The crowd naturally instinctively parted down the center aisle. They moved out of my way, creating a direct, unhindered path from the entrance to the stage. I marched down the center of the ballroom with the rhythmic, measured stride of an officer inspecting the troops. On stage, Jamal's voice cracked and died in his throat. He lowered the microphone, staring at me as if I were an apparition. Loretta's perfect society smile shattered. Her eyes widened in absolute terror as she recognized the uniform and the woman wearing it. She immediately panicked, abandoning her poise and lunging toward the edge of the stage. She flagged down a tuxedo-clad security guard standing near the front tables. "Get her out of here!" Loretta hissed, her voice carrying an ugly, desperate edge that echoed through the quiet room. "She is a trespasser. You do not belong here, you disgrace. Remove her immediately." The security guard took one hesitant step toward me, but I did not even look at him. My eyes were locked dead ahead. He stopped, recognizing the absolute authority radiating from my posture. I bypassed the stage entirely and marched directly to the audio-visual control desk positioned in the shadowed corner of the room. The young technician sitting behind the mixing board froze his hands, hovering over the sliders. "Step aside," I commanded. My voice was low, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. The technician scrambled out of his chair. I pulled a sleek encrypted flash drive from my jacket pocket and inserted it directly into the primary control console. I bypassed their presentation software, overriding the network with a few swift keystrokes. I reached down and picked up the spare wired microphone resting on the desk. I turned to face the room. Loretta was practically hyperventilating on the stage. "Turn that screen off," she shrieked, pointing at the technician. I tapped the microphone once. The sharp sound silenced her completely. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice booming through the ballroom's surround sound system. "My name is Major Kendra Sterling. The people on this stage are currently asking you to invest in the future of their family legacy. I think it is only fair you understand exactly how this family conducts its business." I pressed the spacebar on the keyboard. The soaring bar graph on the massive screen behind Jamal vanished. It was instantly replaced by two side-by-side documents. On the left was the fraudulent paternity test Jamal had submitted to the family court, featuring the bright red 0% probability. On the right was the federal court-mandated laboratory result, officially confirming his paternity with a 99.9% match. A collective gasp rippled through the hundreds of investors. The wealthy elite of Atlanta were staring at irrefutable proof of a fabricated legal document. "What you are looking at is a forged medical document submitted under penalty of perjury," I stated, pacing slowly toward the center of the room so every person could see me. Jamal Sterling attempted to use this forgery to strip a mother of her child and seize a minor's trust fund. Jamal staggered backward, gripping the wooden podium to keep his legs from collapsing. "That is a lie," Loretta screamed, gripping her emerald gown. "She is hacking the system. She is a liar." I pressed a button on the remote clicker in my hand. The slide changed. Slide 2 hit the screen like a physical blow. It was the official corporate registry for the fake clinic that had produced the fraudulent DNA test. I had highlighted the owner's name in bright yellow. The name printed in bold black letters was a Shell LLC, traced directly back to Loretta Sterling. "This clinic does not exist," I announced, the cold acoustics of the room amplifying my words. "It is a shell corporation registered to Loretta Sterling, designed exclusively to manufacture fraudulent evidence for court proceedings." The ballroom erupted into a chaotic murmur of shock and disgust. Women in diamond necklaces raised their hands to their mouths. Men in tailored suits shook their heads, staring at Loretta with open revulsion. The facade of the pristine high society matriarch was completely annihilated. She was standing under bright stage lights, exposed as a criminal. But I was not finished. The killing blow was still loaded in the chamber. I clicked the remote one final time. Slide 3 illuminated the room. On the left side of the screen was Jamal's sworn financial disclosure affidavit, the document Brooke had manipulated him into signing. His signature sat proudly beneath the perjury warning. On the right side of the screen were the highly confidential financial records from the offshore private equity firm. The records clearly displayed a defaulted toxic debt of $1.5 million. "Jamal Sterling is currently standing before you soliciting capital to expand a thriving logistics empire," I said, my voice ringing with total clarity. "The truth is, his operating accounts are entirely frozen. He owes $1.5 million to an offshore equity firm. He committed federal perjury by hiding this debt on a sworn court document in a desperate attempt to gain access to his infant daughter's $4 million trust fund to save his own skin." The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. The investors did not whisper. They did not hesitate. Almost in perfect unison, the wealthiest individuals in Atlanta snapped their checkbooks shut. They picked up their coats, their designer bags, and their briefcases. They turned their backs on the stage and began walking toward the exits. They were fleeing the room, treating Jamal and Loretta like carrying a highly contagious disease. No one wanted to be associated with federal perjury and offshore financial fraud. Jamal dropped the microphone. It hit the stage floor with a loud, painful feedback screech. He dropped to his knees, weeping openly into his hands, his entire life reduced to ash in front of his peers. Loretta stood frozen, her mouth hanging open, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of her social and financial destruction. Near the back of the room, I caught a flash of movement. Brooke and Malik were attempting to slip out the side exit doors. Brooke had her head ducked low, trying to hide her face behind her purse, desperate to escape the fallout of the catastrophe she had helped accelerate. Malik grabbed the brass handle of the side door and pulled it open. He immediately stumbled backward. The doors swung wide open, revealing 4 men in tactical windbreakers standing in the corridor. They did not look like security guards. They moved with the synchronized authority of federal law enforcement. The lead agent stepped into the ballroom, blocking Malik and Brooke's escape route. He raised his hand, flashing a gold federal badge that caught the light of the chandeliers. Captain Jackson had kept his promise. The tip-off regarding wire fraud, perjury, and the attempted theft of a federal trust fund had been deployed with perfect timing. Jamal and Loretta Sterling, the lead agent, announced, his voice cutting through the remaining chaos in the room. "We have federal warrants for your arrest regarding perjury, wire fraud, and the production of fraudulent instruments. Step down from the stage and keep your hands where we can see them." I stood in the center of the emptying ballroom, watching the federal agents move decisively toward the stage. I watched Jamal being pulled to his feet, his wrists forced behind his back. I watched Loretta sobbing hysterically as steel cuffs clicked shut over her beaded emerald gown. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply turned on my heel and walked out through the main double doors, leaving them to the justice they had so meticulously earned. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut, echoing sharply through the silent ballroom. The federal agents moved with mechanical efficiency, reading Jamal his Miranda rights as they turned him roughly toward the exit. Jamal did not fight. He was a hollow shell, his shoulders slumped and his chin resting on his chest. The artificial bravado that had fueled his entire existence was completely extinguished. Loretta, on the other hand, completely disintegrated. Her knees gave out. She collapsed onto the polished hardwood floor, her heavy beaded emerald gown pooling around her like a deflated parachute. The wealthy investors she had spent decades trying to impress were watching her humiliate herself in real time. She crawled forward, reaching out with trembling manicured hands to grab the hem of my military dress jacket. "Kendra, please stop them!" Loretta wailed. Her perfectly styled hair was clinging to her wet face, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. "He is your husband. He is Zuri's father. You cannot let them take him. We will give you whatever you want. We will sign the papers. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding." I looked down at her. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no vindication, just the cold, sterile satisfaction of a completed mission. I did not speak to her. I simply stepped to the right, bypassing her outstretched hands, and walked smoothly toward the exit. Before I pushed through the double doors, I caught sight of Brooke and Malik huddled near the service corridor. Brooke was sobbing uncontrollably, clutching her husband's arm. Malik looked like a ghost. Their offshore accounts were frozen, their home was in foreclosure, and their association with Jamal's fraudulent logistics company meant they were facing their own crippling federal audits. They had chosen to align themselves with a parasite, and now they were going down with the host. 7 days later, I was back in courtroom 4B. The atmosphere was entirely different. Jamal did not wear a custom charcoal suit. He wore a bright orange federal jumpsuit, and his wrists and ankles were bound by heavy chains. He sat next to a visibly exhausted public defender, staring blankly at the mahogany table. Victoria Sterling sat beside me, radiating quiet, absolute triumph. Judge Harrison did not mince words. She cited the federal indictment, the forged medical records, the perjured financial disclosures, and the deliberate attempt to defraud a minor beneficiary. With a single sharp strike of her gavel, she suspended Jamal's parental rights indefinitely. I was granted sole physical and legal custody of Zuri. The $4 million trust fund was completely secured, placed under a protective federal lock that required my exclusive authorization to access. Jamal was legally and financially erased from our lives. He was remanded back to federal custody, facing up to 15 years in a maximum security facility. 6 months passed. The transition from active warfare to profound peace was a quiet, beautifully mundane process. The military formally recognized my promotion to major during a morning ceremony, surrounded by my intelligence unit and commanding officers. I stood at attention, feeling the heavy brass pinned to my uniform, knowing I had earned every single commendation through discipline and unwavering focus. I sold the house I had shared with Jamal. It held too many contaminated memories, and I refused to raise my daughter in a space tainted by his presence. I used my own capital to purchase a stunning 2-story property on the edge of a quiet wooded reserve. It featured a massive wraparound porch built from reclaimed oak and a sprawling green lawn secured by a heavy wrought iron gate. It was our fortress. It was our home. I stood on the porch holding a steaming mug of black coffee. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall pine trees, casting long, gentle shadows across the grass. Zuri was running across the lawn, chasing a yellow butterfly, her laughter ringing clear and bright through the warm air. She was safe. She was entirely mine. I took a sip of my coffee and looked out over the property line. They thought they could ambush me in my own home and use my daughter as a pawn. They forgot one thing: I do not negotiate with terrorists. True strength is not about avoiding the ambush. It is about having the tactical precision to ensure they never survive the counterattack. The ultimate lesson from this story is that true power lies in calculated restraint and ironclad boundaries. When faced with deep betrayal from those who should protect you, your greatest weapon isn't chaotic revenge. It is absolute tactical precision. Toxic individuals will inevitably construct their own traps through greed, deception, and arrogance. You simply need the discipline to step aside and let them fall into it. Never negotiate your worth or compromise your peace for people who view you merely as an asset to exploit. Stand tall, protect your independence, and let the undeniable truth be your ultimate victory. Have you ever had to tactically cut toxic people out of your life to protect your peace? Share your fierce story in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe.